This is Rudy.
This is Flick.
This week, we are going to the Stax catalog for the third installment in our Time to Play B-Sides series. We are playing the flip sides from Stax this week, and we also, unfortunately, have to cover some losses to the music world.
Yeah, we want to devote some time to paying tribute to Little Richard, Florian Schneider of Kraftwerk, and Dave Greenfield of the Stranglers. Also this week on Left of the Dial. It is episode 33 of the Left of the Dial podcast coming up right after this.
All right, this one you may well know, you may not know it, and if you don't know it, I really don't know where you've been.
You forgot? Forgot the magnetism of Robin Zander or the charisma of Rick Nielsen?
That's kid stuff.
It's just come up to 5:35 a.m. Kommen Sie bitte und listen to Kraftwerk.
I don't know, man. I kind of like Van Halen.
Well, yeah, Plum, you do. And you know why you do? Because corporate America is shoving something down your throat and making you believe it because that's what they want you to believe. I mean...
Okay, buddy. I was just trying to cheer us up, so go ahead. Put on some old sad bastard music, see if I care.
That was Big Yellow Taxi by Joni Mitchell, a song in which Joni complains that they paved Paradise to put up a parking lot. A measure which actually would have alleviated traffic congestion on the outskirts of Paradise, something which Joni singularly fails to point out, perhaps because it doesn't quite fit in with her blinkered view of the world. Nevertheless, nice song.
How about the tunes? I want you to want me. The Dream Police. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na. Your mama's alright. Your daddy's alright.
I get by because the people make a special effort to shop here. Mostly young men who spend all their time looking for deleted Smith singles and original, not re-released underline Frank Zappa albums.
Yes. I mean, look, you can play an E pentatonic scale at 100 miles an hour till somebody's ears burn off. You can learn that, right? But finding the tangents within the framework, therein lies the artistry, man.
God made your ears. You didn't make them. You gonna argue with God's ears? If it sound good and it feel good, then it's musical. So play it like I say play it. From the top.
That was Sweating Lunatic Iggy Pop, part of our Tuesday night punk pack, which is climaxing at midnight with Madness. This is Norfolk Nights with Alan Partridge, and we're in the middle of Super Talk. Super Talk!
All right, Mr. Flick, we are at the installment 3 of our Time to Play B-Sides. I mean, it's a playlist, and it's content this week. What B-Sides are we featuring, sir?
We're featuring the B-Sides, the rarities, the bonus tracks, just general rarities and B-Sides of the Stax record label.
You and I have gone on a music pilgrimage to Memphis and included a visit to Stax, the Stax Museum. It was one of my favorites, and I actually went back over the holidays this year, and I decided I'm going to that museum. Every time I'm in Memphis, it's really good, and happy to talk about Stax today. We have some new music to talk about, but we also have, and it's sad, but a lot of loss in music this week. Like including including some artists who I think are in my holy of holies. It's been kind of a rough week on the loss of music or loss to music of some big lights.
Yeah, it's certainly not getting any easier, and it's never going to be easy. But we talk about this way too much, and definitely. One really great thing that we get to do on this show is pay tribute to artists that we love. We want to be able to do that while they're alive and not do it after they've passed. But
Yep.
unfortunately, we've been presented with the opportunity to do that way too often since we've started doing this show.
Yeah, we should start with Little Richard, because I mean, rock and roll starts with Little Richard. I think by any reasonable assessment, he's among the proto rock and rollers, and I think added so much to not just rock and roll, but so much of what came after him. I'll talk any excuse to talk about Prince, but Little Richard's influence into so many things we love is really profound.
Yeah, I mean, he is almost, he's kind of the architect of everything, really, and that seems like an overstatement. I don't think so. Like a couple of weeks ago when we had our Iggy Pop episode, we're talking about basically where does punk really start? Because the seed, Iggy wasn't the seed. I would I described him as the trunk of the tree, and I think Little Richard could very well be what you would say is the seed, because he's the seed of everything. Without him, like you said, no Prince. I don't think there's any Beatles, because certainly every time you hear Paul McCartney wail, that's an imitation of Little Richard, and so many great things are just really ripping him off. And things that we love dearly, like the Beatles and Jerry Lee Lewis, even going back to other of the pioneers. I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis was so inspired by Little Richard, and that's going back to the beginning.
I agree. He was just flamboyant and out of control and wild, and that spirit is pretty punk, especially in that the social conditions of that time. He didn't give a fuck. Like he did it all the way. He really. I mean, in a time when we look back in the 50s, it's a time of social constraint. Like he literally was like the release valve for the planet. You know what I mean? Like how uptight the planet was. He really was the release valve.
Yeah, and I'll go back to punk on that. Well, when you think back to how crazy punk seemed at that time, or the way that the story gets told on punk. I mean, Little Richard in the 50s really had to be beyond that. I would say. Because like you said, it was a very conservative time. Little Richard couldn't have been more of a culture shock. I would, and it's tough to say that, not having actually lived through it. But it's just hard to even imagine someone like Little Richard coming out of that era.
He had the goods, you know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things. He's up there. I would say, like Bo Diddley would be another ready comparison. And the sad thing about a lot of these originators of rock and roll is, I mean, they made empires, they made fortunes for other people, and never got them for themselves. Like, think of all the money generated on the ideas of Little Richard so far in the history of popular culture. What percentage of the total money did he get? It's very, very, very small. And it's that's really part of that's like we try to stay positive, but he was not compensated properly. He wasn't treated properly, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think when you look back at the cultural history of America, when 500, 1,000 years from now, I think there's a chance they'll talk about Little Richard. I think that's the first time on the planet something like that came along. Like that does need some explaining, I think, to future generations.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean it's a little different when you're looking back. When you look back at Little Richard, some old footage or whatever, you're seeing familiar things because everything he was doing was imitated by others and continuously imitated as time went on, so that it all looks familiar to us. But that kind of energy, that kind of, the way he could belt out, the way he could play piano, the flamboyance of his stage presence, uh, that certainly that was like a meteor hitting the earth,
It's like I think it was like better than professional wrestling. You know what I mean? Like his kayfabe, his stage persona, who he was in public was just when he was in character. Man, he was really really good.
Well,
All right,
but to say that, I think he was 100% that guy. He was the genuine article. Like
all the way.
That wasn't something he turned on for the stage. That just was him. That was
All right, you're right.
Richard Penniman. Richard Penniman and Little Richard, there wasn't really separation there.
Yeah, he had to put up with some shit. So my favorite tweet that I saw on it doesn't mention Little Richard by name, but it doesn't have to. Tariq Nasheed is a bit of a troll, but he's a great follow on Twitter. And his tweet on the 9th was, Pat Boone walked so that Justin Bieber could run. There's absolutely no way that tweet comes out for any other reason than Little Richard, the passing of Little Richard.
Well,
you made it. Go ahead.
To kind of give that some context, so the Pat Boone story, because probably not everybody listening to us is familiar with Pat Boone, but Pat Boone used to put out the white and pasteurized version that was marketable, and so he would put out a cover of Little Richard that was more acceptable to buy in, depending on where you shop for your records.
Yeah, I did throw a Pat Boone cover of Little Richard in the Covers for Lovers. I think I did. If I didn't, I'm going to go back and do it.
And I put together a list, Little Richard list that I think is a pretty good introduction, and also I feel like you might have some finds in there. There was an album that I really enjoyed listening to that I wasn't familiar with earlier. It was from his reprise era, and let me see here, just a moment, pulling it up. Sorry. Okay. I'm blanking on the title of it, and I'm not finding it now. Just a moment.
Are you talking also about Pat Boone's great comeback album, No More Mr. Nice Guy?
I'm not. But okay, so the Little Richard album that I was referring to is The Second Coming. It's from his reprise era. I included some stuff on it on our playlist, our Rest in Peace Little Richard playlist, and I recommend especially that because everybody knows Long Tall Sally, I think, and Tutti Frutti and Good Golly Miss Molly. But there are some few things that I hope are good finds.
Yep, I will go through that. I think everybody owes Little Richard a look back. That's a sad one. That's a really sad one. Not that any of them aren't. We also have to talk about a couple others, unfortunately.
So so since you mentioned that tweet, I do kind of want to mention.
Yes.
So when somebody passes in the world of rock, I sometimes will want to stay away from social media because this is a good example over the weekend when Little Richard passed. I think we all have the cross section of Facebook friends. I think we have our crossover. We all have certain Facebook friends that are probably like this, but I think more than once I saw somebody mention how their introduction to Tutti Frutti was from the California Raisins.
Oh.
And that's always a tough thing when somebody passes that is important, and then you go on Facebook and you realize that that's kind of what their careers get reduced to.
Well, I must say, being named Rudy is not has not proven to be a great advantage to me in life. You know, at Christmas I get the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. If I order coffee, they always yell out Ruby. It's a curse. Tutti Frutti has been the bane of my young life. But as much as I hated having that shouted at me or sung at me over and over again, I did like the song. It was pretty great. And the womp bomp baloo bomp womp bomp bomp. I mean, that's where that comes from. How much hay was made out of that? So I forgive all of Little Richard for all the times I had Tutti Frutti, oh Rudy yelled at me as a child.
Okay, and I'm looking at the list right now, and you did add the Pat Boone song to the Little Richard list.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, did you?
Uh-oh. That was an accidental.
Okay.
That's a classification error, Flick.
Yeah, okay,
I apologize.
So let's do away with that, and I'll put it in the Covers to Lovers list.
Okay. Sold.
Yeah.
Sold.
I can see why you did that though, because I did include the Delaney and Bonnie version of Miss Anne on the Little Richard list, but that's because Little Richard is actually on that song, and so that's why I put it on the Little Richard
And
list.
there is no Little Richard in the Pat Boone cover. We can agree to that.
I'm going to assume not.
There is none. All right, let's talk. We're another pioneer, and while the band Kraftwerk, I'm not sure you started a playlist for them as well. I think we have to mourn the passing. I mean, do you think we're mourning the passing of Kraftwerk too, Flick?
I don't know, because Florian Schneider actually was not really working in Kraftwerk. I think for the past decade or so.
Okay.
So possibly not. But yeah, I mean, he's one of the two founding members. So
yeah, my thing with Kraftwerk is I had the single for Music Nonstop, which I got at the Salvation Army in the Czech Village in Cedar Rapids. It was like 25 cents. And I left it on my turntable, and one of my younger sisters came down and just put on the record that was on there and played it. And her mind was completely blown. She had never heard music like that in her entire life. I believe she had like an instant transformation because of hearing the first Kraftwerk record. Mine wasn't quite as dramatic, but nothing really ever sounded quite like that. And I'm looking at it's like 1974 is when they started. They sounded pretty similar over their whole career, but nothing ever really sounded like that before. And it really, when you go back and listen to it, it doesn't sound as cheesy as you might think a first gen synthesizer specializing band to be. It really doesn't sound dated at all. It still sounds fucking great.
Yeah, I think that's really an accomplishment. Because because really any use of early use of keyboards, electronic keyboards, always sounds pretty dated. So to do what Kraftwerk was able to do with the instrumentation that they did and have it be something that sounds timeless is pretty amazing, really.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend that I'm jamming to Autobahn every week or anything like that, but every once in a while I get in a mood where I will spend quite a bit of time with my Kraftwerk playlist, and I think they were just music lovers. I think and they were also nerds, which is fine. I consider myself a music loving nerd, and the fact that I don't know how to explain it for entirely mechanical music, it has a pocket. It has groove. It actually has some groove to it, which is, Giorgio Moroder tries really hard for groove and he gets it. I don't know if they were trying as hard, but I can't believe such four on the floor square shit has such groove and such a pocket to it. It's
there's a heart to it. I guess that's it. There's something at the core of it that Because a lot of times I think experimental music can be very off-putting, and I think the thing that makes Kraftwerk work it's just that there's a core to it. Like there's a song, like there's still an importance put on the song, and not just experimentalism.
Yeah, they wrote great little hooks. They really did write great little hooks, and they might be greatly sped up, or they may be mutated by the effects chosen or the arrangement chosen for them. But they were actually, I don't know. When I went back, I was surprised at how often I hum it, how often just how big the hooks are, how often they become earworms. It's I don't know. I can't promise I'm going to go like into a deep dive with them right now, but I've never. I've always thought they were underappreciated. I feel like they could be taught in school. You know what I mean? I feel like they should be taught in school more than they were.
Yeah, and I put I think you mentioned I put together a playlist for Florian Schneider, and also like it's almost completely Kraftwerk music, but I did also include a couple of things that were inspired by Kraftwerk. David Bowie's instrumental from Heroes that is actually titled V2 Schneider in honor, and Neil Young with Computer Age from the Trans album, which that was my window into Kraftwerk. Neil Young doing Trans was my introduction.
Who do you think is Germany's greatest musical export? Is it Kraftwerk? They're certainly in contention.
I like that's it's tough to do that when we're
on the spot.
Well, I mean,
I might go with Can. I might go with Can.
My first thought was Can, but then again, like we're while we're eulogizing Florian Schneider, it's probably not the best context to make that competition.
And you can't count the Monks. You cannot count the Monks because they were American GIs, but they definitely come from Germany for sure. The music does. All right, well, we'll take it up later. It just came to mind, and just realized like that's 1974. That's like how many was it? 40 years of making records.
Well,
and they're all interesting.
They started in 1970, actually.
Oh my God, they're ancient.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, we have another one we have to get into here, and this is, I learned a little bit about you, Mr. Flick. I don't know why I didn't just assume you were a Stranglers fan. I thought I was the Stranglers fan-in-chief on this here podcast, but it turns out you go deep in the Stranglers category, so we are both hurt this week to find out that their great keyboardist, Dave Greenfield, passed away.
Yeah, Dave Greenfield was, I think, every bit as important to the Stranglers, as Hugh Cornwell was. I think the interesting thing about the Stranglers is they show what the importance of having an open mind is, because in that punk world at that punk time, there wasn't supposed to be any sort of intersection between punk and prog. And when Dave Greenfield became a member of the Stranglers, that intersection existed for the first time, and maybe the only time, really. I think it's it really shows you how, it's the chocolate and peanut butter thing. You don't know that that's going to work until for people that can remember that commercial where the guy drops the chocolate bar.
We're really dating ourselves this week. Yeah, I know what you meant.
It's a classic, though. So, dropping that chocolate bar from the balcony in the movie theater into the guy. Why did the guy have a jar of peanut butter in the movie theater is the real question there. But anyway, the chocolate
will never be settled, by the way. That will never be settled. Like, I mean, it's impossible. But go on.
Yeah, but anyway, chocolate and peanut butter works, and the thought is, that was never going to happen. That was never going to work. But Dave Greenfield and Hugh Cornwell together, those worlds collided, and the Stranglers are the result, and it worked perfectly. And I mean, those first two and probably three Stranglers albums, but especially the first two, I think, are as punk as anything. But also, Dave Greenfield was being Dave Greenfield on it, and it worked beautifully. It worked just as it was, worked perfectly.
Well, I mean, it didn't. If they started out as like punk, just a bunch of kids in a shed or whatever, which is, I think, their origin story, they quickly became incredible musicians and songwriters. Like, they were all naturally very, very gifted in the songwriting, the lyric writing, the if you go listen to like live albums, they could bring it. They were like, they came up, I believe they were pub rock, or considered like pub rock-ish or pub rock adjacent at one point. I don't think you can come up through the pub circuit unless you can play and fight, So they weren't like posers. Like, they were artists, but I think they lived what their art. I think they were the real thing. I don't think they were full of shit. They just also happened to be great artists. They had to happen to have a deft touch.
But yeah, I mean, because they're a punk, and because this is the thing sometimes that I take issue with when it comes to punk. I love punk, but it unfortunately, I think, became something that begat a lot of closed-mindedness. And here you have a band that you have a punk band where the keyboardist was a big fan of Rick Wakeman, and that could have been a disqualifying thing right there.
Yeah.
but not in this case, and it just shows you what the end result of that can be.
Yeah, I have never thought of the prog angle on the Stranglers. That is absolutely not how I get to them or in and out of them, but I do see it.
Yeah.
I do see it. The reason for Dave Greenfield being super important is he wrote the music to Golden Brown, which is, became sort of the Stranglers' signature song, which is strange because it sounds like absolutely nothing else really that they did. It really was an anomaly in their catalog in some respects. Now, it's a Stranglers song. I actually would say it's one of the best songs about heroin. It's my favorite, although that rotates. I mean, you can't really beat Heroin by Velvet Underground, but Golden Brown is almost that good from a lyric point of view. It's a peer, I would say, of Velvet Underground's Heroin. I realize that's not a super important topic for everybody, but it is a master stroke of if you like good drug songs.
It's a subgenre of a subgenre.
Well, I mean, drug songs are a very underappreciated genre, in my opinion. Those specifically about heroin, I don't know. That might be a show. I have to be honest. A Golden Brown, I mean, that might. I don't know. Well, we'll take it up if that show comes. But he wrote that musically. It's amazing because while it wasn't a huge hit in America, it was a big hit in the UK and the EU, and it's an odd time signature. It's arranged to be. It's written for a harpsichord.
Yeah.
Way out there.
You certainly might well be right about it. I think there's a certain amount of insight that we both lack on it. I know there's a certain amount of insight that I lack on it. So
if you can dig up, Hugh Cornwell did a mariachi version as a B-side on the God is a Woman single. If you can find the mariachi version of Golden Brown by Hugh Cornwell, I believe you will be well pleased. It is fantastic. It's a really well-written song. And then there's a live, I might throw these on the playlist, come to think of it. There's a live version from the BBC where it's not done in a harpsichord arrangement. It's done with sort of a different keyboard part. It rips. It's really good. Dave Greenfield could really, really, really play. There's a bunch of, and again, I think you and I were talking earlier today. By the time like Dreamtime came out, and the one with the one that's right before Dreamtime, Oral Sculpture, the keyboard playing really changed. But I'm going to try to make a case for stuff like Always the Sun from Dreamtime, which doesn't have the same complexity. It sounds like it's a sequencer more than like his like traditional keyboard stuff. But he adapted really, really well. Most times when a band adopted those types of synthesizers in the mid 80s, like 70s bands adopting 80s keyboard technology, most of those albums are fucking shit. And Strangler's Dreamtime is great. And it's because of Dave Greenfield. So I might go a little heavier on the Dreamtime stuff than we currently are. But give him a chance. Give that stuff a chance. He really is one of the few keyboardists who was so good he made that transition, and that shit, he landed it, and that's a pretty big deal.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think he played a huge role in all of it. You know, like I don't know, even the earlier albums, like I think the first two albums, which I really love the most, are punk albums, but he still plays a huge role. Like that's really what separates the Stranglers from other punk bands, is the fact that the keyboard was always the lead instrument. Everything was filtered through that. Where that's not really the case with hardly any other punk band that you can think of. And I think probably not at all before they led the way in that regard.
Well, your love of their first couple albums is totally understandable, and I have to admit I didn't necessarily start with that stuff because I was like 14, I think 14, 15 when I first heard them, and I remember they got a ton of play on 120 Minutes on MTV with Always the Sun, and I've worn out multiple cassette copies of that would be another show I'd love to do, is to what albums have you worn out and had to buy more than one of, not because there were different versions, but you actually wore that out. Dreamtime cassette was one of mine, and as obviously to go from Always the Sun to like Peaches, that was bracing, especially as a kid. So it took me a while to love that early stuff as much as I do the late stuff. They really don't have a dead spot in the Hugh Cornwell era, in my opinion.
Yeah, and yeah, again, I'll stress the early stuff. So we're coming at it from different angles, but
yep.
To me, No More Heroes is their best album, and then then Radis Norvegicus. I don't know if I'm saying that properly, but that one, not I don't think it's quite as good as No More Heroes, but it's very good, and those are. And so I think those two albums are just thoroughly great, and then after that, it's a bit more. There are certainly highlights throughout, but there are also I think more spots that aren't. It's a little more uneven, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, look, they made some Spinal Tap worthy duds not too long after No More Heroes, but they did get their mojo back. And I got to give Hugh Cornwell credit in that he left. He was like, look, there was no reason to keep going anymore. We pretty much did everything we could with the idea. He had a point. I do think if you go and listen to the last two, or there might be three, Giants is not bad. It's actually got some really good stuff on it. I might throw Boom Boom on from Giants just to give that end of the catalog a little love, but it would not be an attempt to contradict you in any way. I mean, their first couple records and those great United Artists singles collections. So you can buy the A-side, B-sides. There's tons of early Stranglers compilations. Definitely get one of those for your collection if you can. All right, Stranglers. I mean, I think they were going to do their farewell shows, and then the COVID brought that to an end. I almost was considering flying to the UK because they were only going to do British farewell shows, and I never got to see the Stranglers, and I was going to try to go, and I think that's the end of that because I know the drummer Jet Black has emphysema. I think I don't even know if he plays anymore. I don't even know if he plays in the band. So it's down to I don't know. I would think they wouldn't reform, but you never know. You never know. I want to mention before we jump into our topic for the week, or to jump into music, also want to mention the passing of Millie Smalls from. She was from Jamaica, but I believe she recorded "My Boy Lollipop" in the UK, and I think that's generally credited as the first like global reggae hit. It was certainly, I think, it was like a top 20 hit in America. It was a big hit in the UK. I love it. I love reggae music, and one of my favorite compilations, one of the best box sets I've ever bought, is called "The History of Jamaican Music," and it's only I recognize that as like a hit song, but you realize like this music just came out of Jamaica. Like it just this is a very small island with a very small population, and it just does such incredible music. And she really was one of the first time her music was probably the first time most people in the world heard it. So My Boy Lollipop's kind of a novelty record, I guess, in hindsight to a lot of people, but it's actually important. I wanted to mention her passing before. It's been an interesting music week for new music as well. Big one.
Well, yeah, and I want to mention Betty Wright passed.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. That's my fault. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of the song "Clean Up Woman." Included that on our in rotation list as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Snoop, the name drop from Snoop for Betty Wright's pretty good too. So give her credit for that. All right, we're up to new music. I mean, I'm chomping at the bit, but I'm going to allow you, sir, to go first.
Well, I don't have too much to talk about. There wasn't too much that came out this past week that really blew me away. Fontaine's DC have a new song out, and I'm very excited to have new music from them. Not really in love with the single the way that I was in love with some of the songs off of their debut album last year, Doggerel, but I'm very happy to have new music from them. And let me see, the A Hero's Death is the name of the new song, and it's good. They also have a video out for it. I am hoping for stuff that I love more once the album comes out, so I'm looking ahead a little bit to that.
All right, well, I have to talk about the person I talk about on every episode, Bob Dylan. There is a new Bob Dylan album coming. I assume it's going to be all original music. In a way, I don't care. I already pre-ordered it. It looks like it's a double album. It's called Rough and Rowdy Ways. There is a new single that came out this week. And of course, the second I need to recall its actual name, I can't. But I dug it. False Prophet. It is a definite part of his throwback series. Again, I think Bob Dylan was laying up there in Hibbing, Minnesota, listening to distant AM radio from all around, that way AM radio sounds at night, that cavernous sound. I just don't think he ever got over it. I've never got over it. I laid in bed in the middle of Iowa listening to the same stations, although by then there was very little music to be heard. But they all sound like an old AM radio playing in the distance. And frankly, I think he's great at it. I think he's the song is good. I'm going to be again, but he'd have to really screw up for me to say it's bad. So I guess it's not dramatic to get me say I'm super excited for a new Bob Dylan album, and I'm glad there's original music. Hooray!
Yeah, and I'm more on board with this one because the band is doing more than they had been doing on the previous ones. There's a bit more musicality to this one. There's something resembling a melody. That things I think were lacking on the other two preview tracks. On this album. So
well, I would be shocked if those songs ended up. Maybe I Contain Multitudes, but those are like the talking blues ones he does. This is more like a real song, even though he's doing is like the sort of sing-songy talking with the same sort of cadence he's been doing for a while. I could take or leave it, but lyrically it's very interesting, and I really feel like I think I'm just excited because it feels like he's breaking the fourth wall a little bit. And that's not something he does a ton of directly to the fans. So it's not that he does do it on occasion, and I always find those things very, very interesting. So again, I'm just a fan. I'd buy it if it was. He could have remastered it, or he could have mastered it backward, and I'd like it. That's just how it is.
Yeah. Do you still got time to do that? We'll see how that goes.
If you called a remix, I'd buy it. I probably would buy it because I'm a dumbass. But the number of Bob Dylan, for the number of albums he's put out, the number of like regret purchases I have of Bob Dylan product, it's pretty low. Pretty low.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of in the same boat, but you know, there's definitely some stuff I listen to a lot more than others, you know.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with it. All right, let's jump in. We have a fun topic this week.
Yeah, so it's another installment of Time to Play B-Sides, which is these are the shows where we explore rarities, B-Sides, unreleased songs, import
live cuts, compilation cuts, soundtrack cuts, stuff you got to work for.
Mm-hmm. The deep dive stuff.
This week we're going to talk about the B-sides of Stax Records and Stax Records artists, and this is a topic for that I think Mr. Flick and I are going to end up talking about more than once, just because the quality of the music is great, and you and I, Mr. Flick, we went. What year did we go down there? We went down to Memphis on a music nerd pilgrimage. We went to Ardent. We went to Sun. We went to Stax, and we went to we went to the Goner record store, right?
And we went to Graceland.
And we went to Graceland. So I was coming back through Memphis over the holidays, and I didn't have time to do all of them. I had to pick one, and I picked to do the Stax Museum again. I think it's great. I love the Stax Museum, and I just made a vow to myself when I was there that I'm going to visit it every time I go to Memphis if time allows. It's you're just going through there and realizing how much absolute magic came out of that place. It really does make you like. Stax may not be the most famous because it was part of the Atlantic labels. You know, it was like part of a stable of other labels, like with Dial and Volt, and Atlantic had a ton, and Atco had a ton.
Yeah, I mean, Stax was a mom and pop though, and then Atlantic gave it a distribution deal.
Yeah.
So,
but a lot of people would have gotten those records from those Atlantic Records compilations of the '60s. You know what I mean? Like they'd be side by side with things like For What It's Worth or A Bottle of Wine by Jimmy Guy. I'm just thinking of the ones my parents had. That's where I first heard all the Stax stuff. And those records, millions and millions and millions.
But yeah, I mean, Stax started out as a very much of a mom and pop operation, and really held on to that even when they had to deal with Atlantic. They were very much still run that way.
Yep.
And I think it's worth pointing out that, you know, Motown was Hitsville and Stax was Soulsville. So that, you know, they weren't as you know, by name, they weren't as focused on generating hits, you know. Right. But they did it, you know. They did it, but they weren't like you know, just a factory, you know, a hit factory.
No, they had some hit and miss, but they had a 10-year, I'd say a prime, like a 10-year prime. And then they still had some great records in the mid 70s, late 70s. But they really, I mean, if you think, especially again, I hate to keep coming back to the museum, but dare I say, if you have time in Memphis, I would make more time for the Stax Museum than I would for Graceland at this point. I've been to Graceland a few times. I think it's a little overdone. But when you realize like
that's an understatement.
Yeah, well, the Isaac Hayes stuff. I mean, he had hits in the 60s and stuff, but really like in the 70s, is when Shaft comes out. People sort of forget that Stax was behind Enterprise Records too. And the theme from Shaft. I mean, is there a more badass '70s record than the theme from Shaft?
Yeah. 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 So yeah, the thing about the first decade, that was really where everything was golden, and there wasn't too much hit and miss. In the '70s, unfortunately, as you know, the music business eats up a lot of things, unfortunately, and such is the story of Stax. You know, they ran into a bad deal, you know, a deal that they thought was a good deal for the label that turned into a bad deal, and just was basically the undoing of Stax.
Yeah. So I think what we're gonna try to shoot for what, like a dozen?
Yeah, I think so. I think we can do a dozen here. Might not be the total back and forth, but yeah, I'm gonna let you start, and then
All right.
I'm gonna pick it up from there.
Well, like my list is a little bit heavy on Otis Redding, and I want to go maybe what it would be like a side case here. In 1992, there was a greatest hits album of his came out. The name of the album that was called "Remember Me." So in 1992, it's a collection. I don't know if it's all rarities. Like it looks like it's got quite a bit of rarities on it. So I became very interested in take two of Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, and I realize I run the risk of making too much out of it, but the lyric is slightly different. Instead of saying, I had nothing to live for, he said, I've got nothing to live for. And we were talking before, and I agree the song is sad in general, but there's something just more sad about him being actively saying, I'm sitting on the dock of the bay because I've got nothing to live for. It has implications that I had nothing to live for. It looked like nothing was going to come my way. The present tense versus the past tense, I think makes it one of the more important rarities if you love the song. So if you love the song, I don't know if it'll make it. I don't think it can ruin it for you, but I want to put it up there first. Give it a listen and see if just that little twist puts a little different energy on it. I think it starts with a little different energy too. The bass, which is one of the most beautiful sounding. I mean, I think anybody could pick up a bass and within 30 seconds figure out the notes. But I think it would take you 30 years to be able to play it that beautifully, to make it sound that beautiful. It's actually a little more diminished in the second version, and it sounds folky. And I don't associate Otis Redding with like folk music per se. I associate him with being like electric in many senses of the word. But this version has a little bit of like a folky tinge to it too that the official version doesn't have. So that's my most important one I had to get out there. It's take two of Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding.
Okay, I'm going to start. Since you started with Otis, I'm going to start with Otis, and I think I'm going to finish with Otis. Otis is the bread in my Stax sandwich here, and I have a few to pick from. And so, do you have more Otis on your list?
I have quite a bit of Otis.
Okay, so I'll mention because there might be one that neither of us get to that has to be mentioned, and so I won't mention it now just in case it's on your list. I'm going to start though with "You Don't Miss Your Water," which is the B-side to the '67 single "Shake." And "You Don't Miss Your Water" is a song that was already a big single for Stax by William Bell. But he Otised it as Otis often did. He made it his own, and I think in some ways, certainly, you know, you can say he improved on it, and it's no knock against what William Bell did with it, because it was great. It was a great song to begin with, but still, Otis could Otis it, you know, and that's what he did here. So I'm going to start with that one, and again, that's from 1967. "You Don't Miss Your Water," the Otis Redding version.
All right, this is a bit on the nose and cheesy to do, but to me, the quintessential Stax song. I Otis Redding is sort of like the quintessential Stax artist, I guess. But I mean, Booker T and the MGs are the house band,
right?
And Yeah.
Anytime you hear a Stax song, you're hearing Booker T and the MGs. I mean, it's very rare that you're hearing musicians that aren't Booker T and the MGs.
And that band stayed together for decades. There might even still be a version of them. I mean, they weren't just a studio band. They were a real band. You can't stay together that long unless you're actually like friends and stuff. To me, Green Onions. I'm sad that everybody thinks of Green Onions as like a cliche from movie trailers. Green Onions is like one of the greatest things ever recorded. And I've read enough about the history to know that it was sort of it wasn't a goof. It was just like the warm-up they used to play just to get ready to do other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's more to that record. It's exactly like the bass line in for Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. Anybody in the world could have explained to them that drum part. It on paper, it's the most simple drum part in the world, but I try to bring it home that well. Like, it's just so good. So it's cheesy to go right for it, but the flip side of Green Onions is a song called Behave Yourself, which is great on its own. And it's not a Green Onions clone. And really, it's slower. It doesn't have the same kind of pocket to it. But it's recorded by the same band. I've got to guess it's in this very similar session, and it just has that incredible sound. The hi-hat sound, the way that the foot sounds hitting the hi-hat is very similar. It just feels like it's a fantastic companion for Green Onions. Green Onions, one of the greatest songs of all time. This definitely has got to be in the consideration for the top 100 7-inch, like the top 100 7-inches of all time. It certainly would be on mine. So I'm taking Green Onions B-side, Behave Yourself.
Okay, well, I'm gonna follow suit with the Booker T and the MGs. So it probably won't completely play out this way, I'm sure. But
No.
But while we're able to, I'm going to just pick up off of the band that you pick up where you started or where you left off, and the Booker T and the MG song that I'm going to have here is Summertime, which is from Porgy and Bess. Their version of that song which is the B-side to Hip Hugger in 1967.
Also awesome.
What's that?
Awesome. I love Hip Hugger.
Yeah, and so their version of Summertime is very dramatically different than, dramatic is the right word. There's very much a sense of drama on this song, and that's why it really stood out to me and does. So Steve Cropper is playing guitar. Like, Steve Cropper, one of my favorite all-time guitarists, playing just the most bluesy guitar that I've ever heard him play on this track, and then Al Jackson's drumming is just everything just letter perfect. It takes a song that I don't know that you necessarily think of as super dark, but between the way that Steve Cropper's playing the bluesy guitar and the way that Al Jackson is drumming and the way that Booker is playing the keyboards, it gives you the sense of one of those summer times where it's not the good kind of summertime. It's right. not the happy kind of summertime. It's the summertime where stuff is happening. Yeah.
The streets are hot.
Yeah, exactly. More than the back of your neck is getting dirty and gritty in this one.
Do not be dissing Summer in the City up in here. Do not be doing that.
I don't know why you take everything as a diss.
Don't be doing that.
Just because I mentioned it, it's not a diss.
All right. Well, it's interesting because we both picked Booker T and the MG songs that have a little darkness and a little edge to them, which is so not what their catalog is famous for. They could do it for other artists, but under their own name, they always did sort of like good time records. At least the singles always were. But there's
the
more
singles.
to it than that.
Yeah, but yeah, if you take a deeper dive on Booker T and the MGs, you do see that here and there, and really, I think a lot of their better tracks have that. But yeah, you know, it's not what sold, but Booker T and the MGs had a lot more to them than just what was selling.
Yeah, and they could we done right here, I think, because that is really truly like Booker T and the MGs are known for all these sort of like feel good songs. Time is Tight is a great little song. Hip Hugger, Green Onions, but yet they really could bring the darker stuff.
Yeah, well, and okay, so since you brought up Time is Tight, I kind of wanted to stretch, and maybe I will. I might come back to Time is Tight. Well, yeah, I'm okay. I'm gonna make sure to come back to Time is Tight now that we mention it. There's a bit of a stretch that's required for this one.
All right. Well, there's a couple. We're both gonna have to get some stretches here to get through the list. Up next, I am grabbing it was originally, there's an album by Isaac Hayes called Groovathon. And I do not want to try, I'm not going to attempt to perpetrate that I'm some lifelong, deep Isaac Hayes catalog guy. But when I was growing up in Chicago, the White Sox, the Chicago White Sox used to play on the UHF channel, which at the time I think was channel 20 WSNS, and I have distinct memories. Now it could be from the post-game show hosted by Jimmy Pearsall, but there was great bumper music back then. Yeah. I mean, the best bumper music back on the old White Sox games in the 70s and early 80s, and that's where I think I first heard Isaac Hayes' Disco Connection. I love Shaft, and I liked all the stuff on Hot Buttered Soul's great, and Buns of Plenty's great, but you really got to give some of his Arista stuff and later stuff a real chance. So anyway, he puts out the album Groovathon. He does all sorts of songs that are like 30 minutes long. Very few artists can pull off a 30-minute song and make you glad you're aboard for the entire thing. Well, Groovathon was edited down on the album to I think a 9-minute version. That's fantastic. But there is an 18-minute, 47-second long extended jam of Groovathon. I beseech thee, humble listener, please give 19 minutes to the extended jam version of Isaac Hayes' Groovathon. I submit to you, Mr. Flick.
Okay, and I think at this point you might have to explain what UHF is.
Oh my God, I'm so old. It's perfect. I didn't have a chance to even mention I'm recording in my mom's basement. I'm literally in my mom's basement in the Rockford, Illinois Metroplex. I think it's my first time recording here. I'm very, 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 very excited. I'm looking at a TV right now in my mom's basement that has a UHF dial. So TV used to have the VHF, which is like 2 through 13, and then all the channels that were 18 and above, something like that.
Yeah.
18 to 70 or something, and that's the UHF band.
Yeah,
the White Sox used to be on UHF. It was great.
You didn't just used to bring up the guide on the screen and go to channel 730.
No. You'd have to put it on the U channel on the VHF dial and then go to the UHF dial and find your channel. I mean, I get it. It wasn't like it is now where I went to tons of Sox games and tons of, was it Comiskey Park a ton when I was a kid? Everybody went to both Cubs and Sox, but the Cubs always had schmaltzy bullshit bumper music, as I recall. And the White Sox always had good bumper music, and Isaac Hayes is really that's bold.
Yeah, speaking of that, in recent years, I don't remember how long ago this was. On the White Sox radio broadcast, somebody used the song "Friday Night Is Killing Me" a Bash and Pop song, title track to a Bash and Pop album, which was not a single, by the way. It was an album track. However, the title track to the Bash and Pop. So any big Replacements fan like myself, who might have been listening to that, I'm sure they were just as giddy as me. And then everybody else is like, "What in the world are they playing?"
Yeah, I remember they played Yaz's "Don't Go" as well. That's one of that was like I think that was during the year of Winning Ugly,
So
83.
that song doesn't make me think of baseball. I will have to
No,
say.
but it was awesome. They had great bumper music on WSNS. Anyway, go on. Yes.
Okay, so my next one, I'm going to go to Sam and Dave next. The song is Wrap It Up, which was the B-side to I Thank You. So apparently a very popular single in Texas, because the A-side was covered famously by ZZ Top, and the B-side was covered by the Fabulous Thunderbirds. So
Wow, funny you should mention it. The Eurythmics also do a fantastic cover of Wrap It Up. Wrap It Up probably is the greatest B-side in their catalog. That probably is the greatest one. I thought it was an A-side for sure.
Yeah, no, but I Thank You is the A-side and Wrap It Up is the B-side. So you know, it's a single where most people, I think, probably know both of those songs. They might not know the original, but you've heard it.
Well, I feel like a jackass now because I have the Bar-Kays cover of I Thank You on my list, and I did not know that was the A-side with Wrap It Up on the back. To make up and atone for my
it was the
knowledge.
A-side. It was the A-side for Sam and Dave, though, not for the Bar-Kays.
Right.
So
the
Bar-Kays, if they had that as a B-side, that's still eligible.
That is eligible, but I did not know they were associated. And I have to admit, I know I Thank You from ZZ Top first. Like I wasn't that I have some ghosts in my past, and one of them actually, you know what? I'm going to take that back. I'm not ashamed that I liked Eliminator. Eliminator's a good record, and some of their other stuff is good. So
yeah. I think you can make a strong case. So like there's even a ZZ Top record from a few years ago that I liked quite a bit.
Yeah, they do 25 Lighters. They do a cover of a rap song. It's fantastic. The video's great too.
Yeah, I think the production on ZZ Top songs, especially once they get past Eliminator, I think it gets really rough. There's a big long rough patch with ZZ Top.
Yeah, but add them to the list of bands that need a draft, because if we had to do a 15-song draft to them, I think that would separate men from boys. Just saying.
we could maybe do that. But yeah, you know, ZZ Top great in the early days, and then they got big, and then I think being big kind of hurt their music for a long period of time, and then they weren't big anymore, and I think they started making some interesting stuff again. And I'm not going to simplify it by just saying just because they got big, but it certainly didn't help.
All right. Well, I'm going to use the Bar-Kays as my choice or my song, but what really was in the place is the one song that was really originally in that spot. You brought up the ZZ Top, and so I had to talk about I Thank You, but there is a song we both have on our lists. It is the Staple Singer Stay With Us. And that was originally going to be like my fourth pick. Where did you have it in your list, or are you not ranked?
I'm not really ranking them. I'm gonna finish with my favorite one, but other than that, I'm not ranking them.
All right.
So basically, we're sharing this one. Is that?
I think we should. I think it's good. I think it's good enough to share.
Okay, so we can do that. We can share one. All right. So Stay With Us, which is the B-side to Long Walk to D.C. from October 1968.
That is?
What's that?
Stay With Us is?
Yeah.
Wow. I need to listen to more Staple Singers, because if they have that as a B-side, wow. That's some amazing stuff. Amazing stuff.
Yeah.
All right, you're up. You're up.
Okay, so we're not done with this one though, are we?
Well, we both shared it. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's I have to. So just to kind of give our little thing on it. I love the groove to this song, and of course the harmonies are always great with the staple singers. That gospel feel, but then there's the groove to it and it's gospel funk. You know, this song is just straight up. It's gospel funk and pure staple singers. It's beautiful. It's great.
Yeah, when they're good, they're about as good as it gets. I did just take a look here on Spotify. They did just put out a collection of all their Stax material this year called "Come Go With Me." It's like six. Looks like it's 6 discs long.
7, I think.
7, yeah. I was unaware of this. That is what I will be listening to this week. Wow, that looks good.
Yeah.
Very, very good. Very, very good. All right, you can. I gave away the staple singer, so you get another turn, sir.
Okay. Well, okay. So my next one is "I'm Trying," which is a Johnny Taylor song and a B-side to "Who's Making Love," October '68. And love the horns on this. Love the horns on the intro. They're very limber. It's another one. I mean, this was also an album track. So we are getting to the point in 1968 where B-sides are also album tracks. Stax in the early days were kind of using very much throwaway material for their B-sides. And as the 60s went on, the B-sides actually were starting to have substance to them. And these are two, you know, everything we've talked about. I mean, everything I've had to the point on mine is a B-side, a Stax B-side from the later 60s. So really good material because they're also album tracks, you know, at this point, I think. But yeah, another good one here from Johnny Taylor. "I'm Trying."
Yeah, that A side too. I mean,
yeah, the A side is a classic.
Stax, like James Brown had incredible grooves, and James Brown could bring it hard, but Stax like always brought it hard. I mean, James Brown had a couple gears. Stax played, I mean, pretty hard. The A side there on from Johnny Taylor. I mean, that is some hard shit. I'm gonna go next with a controversial call, but it's contemporaneous evidence. I'm gonna go with Booker MT. So I act like I was there. I don't think I was. I don't think I was even born. I think I was actually born exactly. I was born in June of 1970. So at that time, Creedence Clearwater Revival and Booker T and the MGs were on tour together. And there are apparently a couple recordings that they made together. And one of them is they were just at Fantasy Studios, which I'm guessing was in the Bay Area somewhere while they were on their tour together. And whoever was playing guitar, I don't know if it was John Fogerty or who, did the opening lick to Born on the Bayou while the tape was rolling, and the whole room's like, yeah, let's play that. And they're just, talking around as musicians. And then they do get a little something going there. And it's I don't really like Born on the Bayou all that much. I like Creedence Clearwater Revival a ton. And I like Cosmos Factory. My parents played that album to death when I was a kid. So this was like a bonus track put on the reissues from a couple of years ago. The version of Born on the Bayou by Booker T and the MGs with Creedence Clearwater Revival. I think it belongs because they were still a Stax band, and they were playing Stax music. They just happened to play it with Creedence Clearwater Revival. And damn it, it's a rarity show, and that's a good rarity.
Okay, and I'll also make a quick mention. I have the Little Richard version of Born on the Bayou on the Little Richard list. So it for Born on the Bayou enthusiasts, you get a double dose for the current playlist.
We aim to please.
All right, so since you went that route with the Booker T and the MGs, well, I think it's just Booker T on that one, right? It isn't the rest of the MGs, is it? Or is it just Booker T and the MGs with John Fogerty?
It's Creedence Clearwater. You know what? I didn't look it up, and I should have.
Okay.
But it's obvious Booker T, but it sounds like there's more than that.
Okay. All right. So so my next one comes from in '92, I think. Was that the 30th anniversary of Bob Dylan where they had the special?
Yeah, like 93 maybe, somewhere in there.
92 or 93. All right, so Booker T and the MGs were also the house band for that concert, which was a tribute to Bob Dylan, where everybody did Dylan songs. The highlight for me, and I think for a lot of people, was when Neil Young did a couple of songs. He did All Along the Watchtower and Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues. And I also should make a quick mention that one of the best concerts I've ever been to in my life was when Neil Young. I saw Neil Young with Booker T and the MGs as his backing band. Like just two of my favorite worlds colliding there. I super hardcore fan of Neil Young and super hardcore fan of Booker T and the MGs, and to see them play together was ecstasy for me. And it was a concert that lived up to any in my expectations were huge. Totally lived up to all of them, and that union was birthed when Booker T and the MGs were the house band for the Bob Dylan 30th anniversary concert at Madison Square Garden. And what's that?
Oh, nice. Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and so the highlight, I think really, like the highlight of the night for a lot of people was Neil Young doing All Along the Watchtower with Booker T and the MGs as the backing band. So that is my number 6 song on my list.
All right, I'm up next. I don't know where you are on your list, but I included this one in part because of something I know is on your list. So I don't know anything about who the artist Don Nix, Nix. I know nothing about Don Nix. And I don't think I would know about Don Nix if it wasn't for this awesome compilation called Stax Singles Volume 4, The Rarities and the Best of the Rest. That my interest in Stax Records comes from those great Stax Records singles box sets, and I really did rely heavily on this that compilation for this list. Don Nix is like a white dude, and this is like some stoner country shit, some like Graham Parsons adjacent, just mess. You know what I mean? It's just like I don't know enough exactly in detail about because certainly Don Nix was not the only person of European descent ever signed to Stax. I mean, half of Booker T and the MGs was white, so it's not like it's an anomaly to have white artists, but this is some real hillbilly shit, but 60s hillbilly shit. And I dig it for the same reason I like Graham Parsons. It's a friend of mine. It's good. It's good.
And since you mentioned that, I think it is important also to realize that, yeah, you're right. Booker T and the MGs was a mix of white and black musicians, who, and by the way, had great chemistry musically and personally. And
they made black music. They were making black music, but they were a racially mixed band. It's not the only time that this has happened,
But very culturally significant that this was the case in late 60s or 1960s South.
Yeah.
Memphis, Tennessee. Stax was very much is a thing where things like that didn't matter internally, but externally that was a big thing. That was a big issue.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I'm probably not the best person to, I'm not in the best position to offer a ton of insight there. To me, I know that band. I don't know if they would have necessarily said it was political, but I think a lot of the crap they had to deal with was political. You know what I mean? It's a very interesting story. I wonder. I suppose we could do a little more show prep, or I could anyway. I wonder if there's a good book on that. I probably. I mean, I've been in the
Oh,
Stax gift shop plenty.
yeah, no, there's a history, a great book that I can't remember the exact title, but the history of Stax Records.
All right, we'll dig that one up. That one's definitely going on my list, especially if it's on Audible, because I'm getting close to my monthly Audible, and I would definitely grab that. I'm definitely interested in knowing a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I will look that up right now because we shouldn't mention that without.
Well, I didn't want to. I didn't want to bring the race thing up particularly, although it would be remiss if we went through this whole list and we didn't talk about some of the other stuff that ended up being put out by Stax Records. I know I'm going to leave you the big one to talk about, but I'm going to go back and listen to more Don Nix. I am a sucker for this era. There's a compilation called God Bless America. There's a certain strain of really overwrought country music that became like electrified and turned into like hippie country. Fucking great. And this stuff reminds me of that a little bit. So Don Nix, she's a friend of mine. Is my I think is my number 6, my number 7 rather, number 7.
Okay, so the book that I was talking about is called Soulsville, USA: The Story of Stax Records.
Mm-hmm.
It's by Rob Bowman. And the way technology works is as soon as I brought that up, it also told me when I purchased it. So I know it's been 8 years. 8 years ago, I purchased and read that book. But it is a great read, and it does tell you a lot of what you need to know. There's also a great documentary that I'm also forgetting the title of. And also a great documentary on Otis Redding, too.
Yeah. Well, you can. I'm sure that if you as soon as our pandemic is over, the Stax Museum will be very happy to see you. And these are all things that can be purchased in there. Although I didn't buy them, I should have. They can all be purchased in the gift shop there. It
Well,
should be
and
noted.
probably on their website too.
Yeah.
You can still go to their website.
That's
Respect Yourself. The Stax Record story is the documentary.
Nice. There is the Stax Museum is in the building, or a rebuild of the building at the original location where the studio was. The actual studio, I think, had been partially demolished or almost entirely demolished, but they were able to retrieve a lot of the original studio equipment, and the museum really is beautiful. It's wonderfully done, but it's on a campus where there's also a charter school. Like there's a music school, or it's a whole complex. It's a really fascinating and interesting place. I can't recommend it enough. And when you buy the stuff from the gift shop, whether it's online or in the store, I think it benefits that greater charter school. So it matters. And you can buy the Stax oven mitt, which is one of my favorite things in the world. I think I bought 4 of them now in my lifetime. I gave one away as a housewarming gift because I love it so much. Definitely order yourself the Stax oven mitt. It's great because if it's too hot to handle, it comes from Stax.
All right, so my number 7 song. I'm gonna stick with Ardent for a couple here. Ardent was John Fry's recording studio, and they struck a deal with Stax and became part of Stax, which wasn't, the timing of it was far from perfect. It part of the reason why Big Star is a band that most people haven't heard of and certainly didn't hear of at the time was because of the timing of this deal. Their records didn't get distributed because, even though it looked like it was a great time to be part of Stax, where they struck this deal with CBS Records, CBS was not in a good place at that time, and the distribution was nil for Big Star. But luckily luckily by now, more people at least know who they are, and one of my favorite bands, one of my, one of my very favorite bands, like right up there with the Beatles. And the song that I'm putting on my list is the Watch the Sunrise, which was the B-side to Don't Lie to Me. And let me see if I have the year on that. I don't have the year on that. I should just know the year off the top of my head, but I do not.
That's one of the best parts of the Stax Museum is they have actual physical 7 inches for almost everything they released, I think, including the ardent pressings of the Big Star stuff, which I think are pretty rare, right? Like,
yeah,
I think even one of them's a promo only that they've got. I don't even know how many of those were actually sold or where,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, any of those original Big Star anything is extremely rare.
Yeah.
Just because it was a bad era in the Stax story.
Yeah.
Not musically, but business wise, it was a bad era.
Yeah, that's a great single. That is absolutely a great single. Up next for me, I have the flip side of Tramp by Otis Redding, one of his duets with Carla Thomas. I have a soft spot for Tramp. I guess it's a little bit of a novelty record, a little bit, but I actually think it slaps pretty hard, and I think its flip side is a cover of "Tell It Like It Is," which is I have to again. I know everybody loves the original. I believe is that the Neville brothers? I believe did the original.
They wrote it, right? Or
yeah.
I don't know now.
I don't know. Anyway, I prefer this to the other versions that are popularized. There's been a billion covers of it, but the Otis Redding, Carla Thomas cover of "Tell It Like It Is" I think is pretty tough. So I'm throwing that up as my number 8.
Okay, "Tell It Like It Is," yeah, written by Aaron Neville in 1966. Yeah, that's the original version. Is Aaron Neville.
Nice.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna double up. I'm gonna put my 8 and 9 here at the same time because these two songs have a lot in common. Both, again, part of the Ardent period. The output, the brief but not brief but significant, I will say, output of the Ardent label. And it's 2 Johnny Cash covers that were on the Ardent label. The band The Hot Dogs covered "I Walk the Line," which is and Terry Manning covered "Guess Things Happen That Way," which was not a song that was written by Johnny Cash, but a song that he had a hit with and was the first to have a hit with, I'm pretty sure.
Wow, I'm going to give you credit, sir, for digging into the Stax catalog for the Johnny Cash covers. I certainly was not. They couldn't have come from me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know that Ardent catalog pretty well, and I have the vinyl version of the Hot Dogs album.
Where, how, when?
So the Hot Dogs album, I have the vinyl copy of that. It's the only Ardent release that I have the original copy of.
Nice.
Is the Hot Dogs album.
Wow. All right. Well, I will. I won't. I'll just do one. It's kind of a goof record, and I admit I would have never known it if I hadn't found that Stax Volume 4 Rarities compilation. It's called "A Love Affair That Bears No Pain" by a group called The Shack. When you click on the name, the band The Shack, there clearly have been many bands named The Shack, and they are not all the one on this compilation. In fact, from what I can tell, they're the only song online that I can find by The Shack is on this Stax Singles Volume 4 compilation. A Love Affair That Bears No Pain. It's a dark, weird. It's it's one of the weirder records I've heard on Stax. It has like this creepy, faded sounding, like spoken word call and response dynamic that's really anomalous, and I like the weird shit. Frankly, the only people I can think of who would have like known this song by heart would have been like the Cramps. It's like something you'd find on like the Cramps were trying to cover at some point or another. So I'm admittedly I'm using the crutch of going to the rarities compilation, but this one paid dividends. I think it definitely stands out in the catalog and needs a listen. A Love Affair That Bears No Name by The Shack.
All right, so my number 10 also is on that compilation. It's Ollie and the Nightingales' "Girl, You Make My Heart Sing," which was the B-side to let's see, B-side to "I Got a Sure Thing." It's another B-side from 1968. So I think the prime year of the Stax B-sides might have been 1968. Love the rhythm section on this, Duck Dunn and Al Jackson. Love Booker T on the organ here. And it's definitely single material. I don't know how this one ended up being a B-side. This is like a clear-cut hit to me. But it was a B-side, I guess. Not sure how. It slaps as you might
I tried
say.
it, as the kids say.
As the kids say.
Or
Well,
kids,
you said
the internet.
You're the only one I hear say it. So
I'm very online, Flick. I'm sorry. What can I say? I'm gonna go next with "Chicken Scratch" by Rufus Thomas, and I picked it just for an oddball reason. But I mentioned Bo Diddley earlier. If I was to go back, like who all of the foundational first generation rock artists, if my favorite's Bo Diddley. Elvis is a pretty close second, but Bo Diddley I think ended up being he's everywhere. Bo Diddley is everywhere. And when you're listening for it, like to me, "How Soon Is Now" is like always brought up as like the very Bo Diddley, and it is. But there's tons and tons and tons of stuff with it that is based on the Bo Diddley beat. Now, I'm no expert on the history of if there was a big rivalry between Chess Records and Stax. I would be surprised if there was any serious rivalry. But it is sort of interesting how much talent starts down in the deep South on the Illinois Central, riding the city of New Orleans north, and they don't get off in Memphis. They go on to Chicago. Chicago's on the map musically because they didn't get off in Memphis, I would say, in 9 times out of 10. So Bo Diddley's my all-time favorite. I don't know if there was a big rivalry, but "Chicken Scratch" is a Bo Diddley beat. And it's the only one I can think of on Stax. I mean, again, I'm not a catalog super expert, but I would have thought there might have been a little bit of you don't do that, I guess, between the two of them. But not only does they do it, I think it's pretty damn good. And it's past the prime. By then Bo Diddley had sort of had his commercial peak of his early career. I'm not saying Rufus Thomas ripped off Bo Diddley, but I thought it was fascinating that a Bo Diddley beat filtered through the sort of undeniable Stax arrangements and production. It's pretty damn good. So it's a little bit of a novelty record, but Rufus Thomas "Chicken Scratch" definitely worth the listen.
Okay, so this is the one. My number 11 is the one that I was talking about earlier. That is a bit of a stretch because, strictly speaking, I wouldn't say this is a rarity, but it is an alternate take of a song in a way. It is the album version of "Time Is Tight" by Booker T and MGs from Uptight, and it's an entirely different performance than what is on the single, and in an entirely different mood because even though it ends up in the same place, the intro to the "Time Is Tight," that's the album version, is very somber. It's and it starts off with the organ, with the Booker T organ, and then Cropper just kind of coming in, just with a few just sad drop-in notes. and then it picks up with the rhythm section, and then it takes off. But I just love the intro to it. It creates an entirely different mood.
Yep.
And just really, I think I find it to be the superior version because it makes the joy that you get out of the rest of the song so earned, and it just adds such a complexity to it.
Interesting. I'm going to give a quick shout out for the Clash's cover as well. Certainly doesn't have the technical prowess that especially the long version of Booker T and the MGs, but what a great song. What a great song. And I prefer the single version, but if you have even a passing interest in the single version, you got to hear the full. It's pretty intense. It's pretty good.
Yeah, both of them have their place. Both of them have their place on my playlist, but I have a preference for the album version.
All right.
Go ahead. It's nearly 5 minutes too, so it's definitely not single length either. But an entirely different performance, and I think very essential.
So my last spot I'm going to give, we talked about the Staple Singers already, and their version of this song is, I think, the definitive one, and I know there's many, many, many versions of it. But Wade in the Water was released on Stax by the Stars of Virginia. And until we were working on this, I have to admit, I avoided the gospel end of the Stax catalog for the most part, and that was a mistake. I'm not a huge gospel fan. I liked the early Sam Cooke stuff when he was in Chicago, and I like it fine, but I don't usually go out of my way to do it. But I found myself going back to some of this stuff. Wade in the Water by the Stars of Virginia, I would still say the Staple Singers version is definitive, but it's a really interesting arrangement, more choral, or it's more from a chorus rather than the Staple Singers, which has such a strong lead in it. But I love the song, and frankly, I also love the not to keep bringing up Chess Records on the Stax show, but I also love Ramsey Lewis' cover of it. It's just a great song. I don't know if I've ever heard a version I don't like, but I'm going to put Wade in the Water on there to try to entice folks into looking into the gospel end of the Stax catalog a little bit. It just was never really on my radar, but the more time I'm spending with, the more I like it, and so hoping to bring others with.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so my last one is my favorite. I would say my favorite Otis Redding rarity. I do want to mention before I go into that, though, that I kind of hinted at this earlier. So the best B-side that is I would say not on either of our list, and one that when you find out that this is a B-side, you're like, how is that possibly a B-side? But Mr. Pitiful is a B-side. It's a B-side to That's How Strong My Love Is, and it's kind of too well known to even be included on my list or either of our lists.
Right.
But that's actually a B-side. I really don't know the story of that one. And that was a B-side in 1964. So that's even before that strong 1968 output.
I mean, remember, Al Green basically had to be forced to record "Let's Stay Together." He hated it. The High Records was like, "You're going to record it, damn it!" You just never know how these songs end up on which side of the record and which end up on the cutting room floor. It's really hard to tell back then.
Yeah, I don't know. There must be something to it, but yeah. I guess I will say I did put in a lot of prep time, so I don't want to give the impression that I didn't put in prep time, but I guess that's the hole in this. But it's the hole because I didn't actually include that on my list. But there's probably a story there that I should have dug up, even if that song isn't on my list. Anyway, so the song that is on my list, my favorite Otis rarity is "You Left the Water Running." And this was actually recorded in Alabama at Muscle Shoals. And so there are a lot of stories similar to this about Otis, and not just Otis, but stories where just like somebody that you almost deify, shows no sense of ego whatsoever. So this was recorded as kind of a guide track, kind of a demo for Wilson Pickett. Wilson Pickett was the guy who was set to record the song, and and the producer just said, well, why don't you cut this to give Wilson a guide track to go by. And so he did. It's just like you could just say to Otis, why don't you just cut a guide track for Wilson Pickett, and he would do it, even though he's every bit as equal, if not his superior. And it really, to me, it's just one of the best Otis Redding tracks, period, let alone rarities. I absolutely love this song.
If I think Otis Redding was just drove one of his bandmates to the studio,
mm-hmm.
and his bandmate didn't do very well in whatever he was recording, and they gave him just a chance to do something, and he was literally just like accidentally discovered himself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What a strange twist of fate.
Yeah, he was driving his friend, and by the way, Otis Redding from Macon, as was Little Richard. So what was going on in Macon, Georgia?
I don't know.
But anyway, yeah, he was driving his friend to Stax to audition, and his friend didn't end up doing well, and then Otis became Otis. Got it, just somehow somebody said, why don't you do this, and he did it, and magic happened.
Remember, James Brown is from I'm just thinking of Augusta. By the way, thinking of that, they just put out an album of last year. They a show from 1969, James Brown live in Augusta, Georgia, called "Live at Home with His Bad Self." Holy shit! You definitely got to dig that one out. Fantastic, tight as hell. What was going on in Georgia? Allman Brothers come from there too.
Yeah, it was. There was something great going on in Georgia.
Yeah, it's still. I mean, it's had some moments since, but again, once you produce the Atlanta Rhythm section, it takes another 20 years to restore your dignity. So, for whatever great Georgia did in the 60s.
That's not really true. REM came along after that, so.
Damn it! Sorry. Look, I'm in my mom's basement. Her 45s collection is down here somewhere, and somewhere in that, there's some great stuff in there. She's got like Swan Records, "She Loves You" by the Beatles. She's got the VJ singles too. She's got all those weird, she had really great taste, but boy, there's some real crap in there, including the Atlanta Rhythm section, "So Into You," which is, I don't know how many times you can hear that song before you want to shoot yourself. I got close. I'll say that. Anyway, on that uplifting note, can I throw out there just another plea that we talk about doing a geographic-based show? This has really made me want to. I am so impressed with Memphis musically. What was going on in Memphis? Come on.
Yeah.
Memphis Slim, that, by the way, they finished redoing that Memphis Slim house that when you and I were there was still pretty run down. That's been turned into a museum, I believe, or at least I believe it is. And then I think they're going to build a High Records museum too, somewhere there. So you have Elvis, you have High Records, you have Sun Records, and you have Stax. Unbelievable. That's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was just a great environment, and yeah, it was just the right kind of creative circumstances.
Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis, Johnny Cash, and then Isaac Hayes. Incredible. All that stuff. Al Green. Unbelievable. All right. Well, I want to lobby again that we start doing I want to do brackets for cities. Memphis has to seed high. They have to.
Yeah, Memphis definitely seats high. And and the other thing to reiterate, kind of reiterate something, I talked about earlier, but about how Stax worked as a creative environment. I think you maybe hear this about a lot of places. I certainly believe it in the case of Stax. It really seemed like it was a family environment. Everybody had that feeling like they're part of a family as opposed to a part of a business. And I think that's really the key element to why so much great creative things were coming out of that little studio.
Yeah, there was a little. I can't remember the name of it. There was a little record store on the premises too. Man, if I had a time machine, going back and shopping at the house record store in the Stax studio. Come on, how much better could you do than that? There's not many historical record stores I want to go to more than that one.
Yeah,
more than that one. All right, well, we'll pick our topic for next week. You're gonna have to refresh me. What was this? This was episode 30.
This is 33.
33. We should put out maybe an episode that's like a third as long.
Right. Well, this was episode 33, and we spent a lot of time talking about 45. So maybe this was all messed up. I don't know.
Well, we'll figure out another topic, but I would be more than happy to talk about. I mean, Stax A-sides would probably rate a month of shows, so we'll have to figure something out.
Yeah, Stax A-sides was going to be too much to talk about in one episode, so we had to do B-sides. But I don't think it'll be the last time we discuss Stax.
Let's hope not. We won't be talking Stax next week. Not that I know of. But we'll definitely be talking something. We'll see you then.
We'll see you next week.